Welcome back to part 2 of a video series I like to call all of the ridiculous things women have had to endure at the hands of the Spanish Football Federation. If you haven't watched part 1, go do that first because we detail everything that leads up to the moment that Luis Rubiales and Jorge Vilda take control. And now, my dear friends, we get to talk about their demise. Sit down and strap in because it is about to get spicy. So in case you missed it, part 1 details everything from 1980 to 2018 when Luis Rubiales took control. But before we get back into the mistreatment of women in Spanish football, let's take a bit of a look at how things were going for Luis Rubiales in his early years. In April 2022, leaked files known as the Supercopa files detailed conversations between Luis Rubiales and Gerard Piqué. Yes, the man who was dumb enough to cheat on Shakira. These allegations dated right back to 2019, which is just months after he took over the position. This is a whole other drama relating to Saudi Arabia and an alleged conflict over the Spanish Super Cup, so we're not going to get into it because it doesn't directly relate to the women, but it just paints a picture of who Luis Rubiales allegedly was. According to allegations that came to light in 2022 made by his uncle and former chief of staff, Juan Rubiales, Luis Rubiales also allegedly embezzled the federation's money. According to the allegations, he allegedly used federation funds to fund a private trip to New York in 2018, and then allegedly held a number of private parties at a house in Granada in 2020.
Hello, mother. Hello, father. Here I am at Camp Granada.
Marge, it's Lisa at Camp Granada.
This isn't relevant to the story at all. It just paints a bit of a picture of who he was, allegedly. On July 21, 2022, Spain crashed out of the Euros after a 2-1 defeat against England in extra time. Then in August, at the first training camp after the Euros, the senior leadership group, which included Hermoso, pulled aside Luis Rubiales to express their concerns over Jorge Vilda and the whole situation. But instead of doing anything about it, Rubiales sided with Vilda and dismissed their concerns. They also spoke to Vilda directly at this time, but unsurprisingly, he refused to step down. It is worth noting that similarly to when the Spanish team did this years ago, they did try to have these conversations in private before they went public. After nothing was done, they held a press conference expressing their concerns. During the press conference, Paredes said that they had not asked for him to be sacked, but admitted that the captains who represented the group communicated the way they felt. She also said they had been assured things would change. No surprises here, things did not change. 3 weeks later, in September 2022, 15 players emailed the Federation announcing their boycott in separate but identical emails. The emails read, "I inform you that the events that have occurred and the situation that has arisen in the Spanish national team, a situation of which you are aware, are having an important effect on my emotional state and by extension, my health. As a result, I do not currently consider myself to be in a condition to be chosen for the national team, and I ask not to be called up until the situation is resolved." So not included in the 15 players was Spain captain Irene Paredes, Barcelona captain Alexia Putellas, and all-time leading goal scorer Jennifer Hermoso. It is worth noting that Putellas was out on injury at the time and released a statement on social media in solidarity with the 15 players, and Hermoso, who didn't play the Euros at all because of her own injuries, released her own statement on social media. There's no allegation of illegal behaviour by Jorge Vilda, but this is where it just feels a bit deja vu that we're dealing with the same things that the Spanish players were dealing with a few years earlier. The allegations against Jorge Vilda include him being allegedly controlling and allegedly running an anxiety and stress-filled work environment that led to players allegedly leaving in tears. Other allegations include mismanagement of workloads and even allegations that he wouldn't let players lock their own bedroom doors before midnight, a practice that apparently went on until 2019. Other allegations included players allegedly having to show the contents of their bags when they entered training, among other things that just made them feel like a bunch of children, basically. But once again, the Spanish Federation did not listen to the players. Another thing that was raised that is very similar to Carrera is that Jorge Vilda was allowed to stay in his position for 7 years despite not winning any major titles. On the same day that the players boycotted, the Federation released their own statement condemning this, threatening to sanction them and saying they would only be allowed back in the team if they apologized and admitted they were wrong. The RFEF is not going to allow players to question the continuity of the national coach and his coaching staff, since making those decisions is not within their powers. The Federation will not accept any type of pressure from any player when adopting sporting measures. These types of maneuvers are far from exemplary and outside the values of football and sport and are harmful. According to current Spanish legislation, not attending national team call is classified as a very serious infraction and can lead to sanctions between 2 and 5 years of disqualification. The RFEF, contrary to the way these players act, wants to make it clear it will not take them to this extreme or pressure them. Directly, it will not call footballers who do not want to wear the Spain shirt. The federation will only have committed footballers, even if they have to play with youth players. The national team needs players committed to the project, to the defence of our colours, and proud to wear the Spain shirt. The footballers who submitted their resignation will only return to the national team discipline in the future if they accept their mistakes and ask for forgiveness. On September 30, just a few days later, Jorge Vilda played the victim massively and said that he was deeply hurt by the statement. Yikes. Unsurprisingly, he stressed that he would not resign. I am hurt, deeply hurt. It is unjust. We do not deserve it. Spanish football does not deserve it. The greatest pain I feel is because of everything that we have done, the damage to women's football. Ahead of the World Cup, the Spanish team, or I should say a Spanish team, it was effectively their B team, came to Australia for the Cup of Nations, which the Matildas eventually won. None of the 15 players who boycotted made it down under for this trip. They were all still on boycott. When asked about it at the time, Jorge Vilda said he had the best team that he wanted to train. The only thing I ask is maximum respect for our preparation and the players. There's no need to disrespect. We have a great team and your question seems disrespectful. I have the best team that I want to train. Spain always has big aspirations, and if we look at the ranking, we could be like Australia, France, England, United States, Germany. We are another team with a dream. Ultimately, by the time they came back to Australia for the World Cup in July, only 3 of the 15 players from the boycott made it down under. Among the returning players was Bonmati, who went on to win the Ballon d'Or this year, in part thanks to her role at the World Cup. Interestingly, Spain's main keeper and Barcelona number 1 Sandra Panos was not named in the squad. Instead, Vilda went with Carter Cole, who was uncapped at the time and then went on to win the whole World Cup. When asked about the boycott, Bonmati, who eventually returned to the squad, said, "We don't do it on a whim, we do it for the good of women's football." Fast forward a month and Spain did what absolutely nobody expected in the face of all of the controversy they had faced this year, and they won the whole thing. In the face of seemingly endless controversy, they beat England 1-0 in front of a sold-out crowd in Sydney. This was not only their first ever Women's World Cup win, but it also put them next to Germany as the only 2 countries that have won both a men's and women's World Cup. Personally, I was in the crowd that night when they won the World Cup and the vibes were mixed. Like, a part of me was like, oh my gosh, this is a huge accomplishment. These girls have been through hell and back and they've gone and they've won the whole thing and I'm so happy for them. Another part of me felt really disappointed for the players who didn't come back and perhaps missed their only chance at winning a World Cup. But none of this mattered because almost immediately, within minutes of the final whistle, it was overshadowed. Before the confetti had even reached the ground, it felt like everything the Spanish team had just achieved had been overshadowed by the exact nonsense they had spent decades trying to stop. When she stepped up to receive her medal and cement her position in history as a World Cup winner, Jenny Hermoso was kissed by then-President Luis Rubiales in a non-consensual incident that was captured by cameras everywhere. 4K, HD, cameras, video, everything, you name it, this was broadcast all over the world. And while it quickly overshadowed the accomplishments of the team in the minutes and days that followed the incident, in hindsight, this is probably the only reason that any change was ever made. If we look historically at what's happened in Spain and how they've treated women and how many times this has been fought against, and the fact that nothing has ever been done except when there's been a huge amount of mounting public pressure, I feel like if this didn't happen at a World Cup where it was broadcast to millions across the world, nothing would have changed. Had it not been for the fact that this was perhaps the most photographed moment in women's football history, I don't think Rubiales or Vilda would have lost their job. One thing that becomes increasingly apparent throughout this story is the only time we see actual genuine change in the Spanish Federation is when the whole world draws attention to it. And boy, oh boy, draw attention to it, we did. In the immediate hours following the incident, Rubiales brushed off the whole thing. He called his critics losers in an interview with local Spanish radio and then hopped on a flight home. This man thought this was going to blow over, and to be honest, I'm not surprised. If we look at everything that's happened leading up to this point, he had no reason to believe that this would be any different. He thought this was going to blow over and everything would go back to normal. But boy, oh boy, was he wrong. In his interview, he said, "We shouldn't pay attention to idiots and stupid people." He also said that the kiss was consensual and just a peck between 2 friends celebrating something. But by the time he landed back in Spain, Luis Rubiales had become public enemy number one. And like I said, this is probably not something that he expected given everything that had gone down in Spanish football leading up to this point. In the hours that followed, footage went viral of Hermoso saying she didn't like it, referencing the kiss, and the whole world agreed. By the end of the day, the Federation had released a statement allegedly from Hermoso saying that the kiss was mutual and consensual. But according to sources who spoke to The Athletic, this statement was allegedly not from Hermoso at all. Rubiales was then forced to release his own sort of apology video in which he said, "I have to apologize. Probably I made a mistake." Probably? At this point, I just need to stress how much this overshadowed everything that happened. This team had just won a World Cup, and they're not celebrating. We're not seeing photos of them having fun. We are only talking about this man. By the 23rd of August, 3 days after the incident had occurred, the Players' Union had called for Rubiales to be sacked, and the next day FIFA announced they had officially opened disciplinary proceedings against him. And then we have the events of August 25, which honestly, I'm not lying when I say I forgot this happened. This was so deeply unhinged that I had blocked it from my memory. This was an absolutely bonkers 24 hours in football media. At the start of the day, it was rumored that Rubiales was going to be resigning. I even did a podcast interview that day in which we all thought it was imminent. We were like, within the next few hours, this man is going to resign. There was a Federation assembly and all reports pointed to this being the moment he would resign. But then he actually got up to give his speech, and in the most Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort, I'm not fucking leaving way, this man started chanting, "I will not resign, I will not resign." To which he received a standing ovation from the manager of the men's team and the manager of the women's team, Jorge Vilda. He finished his speech, which he received a standing ovation for, by declaring that Jorge Vilda would have his contract extended for another 4 years. Just a reminder at this point, when we entered this tournament, Jorge Vilda was the villain. We didn't like him. Nobody was even talking about Rubiales. And so quickly he overshadowed it and out-villained the alleged villain. In his speech, he said that the kiss was mutual, euphoric, and consensual, and even asserted that it was Jenni Hermoso who picked him up. But of course, this was all refuted later this day when Jenni Hermoso released her first statement on the matter, in which she said she felt vulnerable and the victim of assault. To quote Jenni, "I want to clarify that at no time did I consent to the kiss that he gave me, and in no case did I seek to lift up the president." Rubiales' words are part of the manipulative culture that he himself has generated. I am sure that as world champions, we do not deserve a culture which is so manipulative, hostile, and controlling. This type of incident joins a long list of situations that us players have been reporting in the last few years. This is just the straw that broke the camel's back, and all of the world was able to see it. Attitudes like this have been part of the day-to-day of our national team for years. After releasing her statement, Jenni Hermoso and the other 22 players in the World Cup squad announced a full boycott of national team duties until changes were made. In total, 79 players ended up being part of this boycott. They released the following statement. "It fills us with sadness that such an unacceptable event is succeeding in tarnishing the greatest sporting success of Spanish women's football. We wish to declare that all players signing this document will not return to a national team squad if the current leadership continues." If I sound like a broken record at this point, that is because these players have been fighting for the same things for decades. It has been so long, and it feels like every time they speak out publicly, they are wanting the same things, and every time it somehow gets worse. But again, instead of listening to Jenni Hermoso, the Spanish Federation threatened her and the other players who boycotted with sanctions if they continued. In a statement released shortly after, the Federation said, "The RFEF announces the presentation of as many legal challenges as may correspond in defense of the honorability of the President of the RFEF. In the union's note, it is said to speak on behalf of Jennifer Hermoso, and some statements by the player are attributed to her that are in quotation marks, implying they have been pronounced by her. The RFEF wishes to inform public opinion that the competent bodies of the RFEF are processing the complaints filed with the Federation and have tried to contact Jennifer Hermoso, having been unsuccessful at all times. The RFEF and Mr. President will demonstrate each of the lies that are spread either by someone on behalf of the player or, if applicable, by the player herself. The RFEF and the President, given the seriousness of the content of the press release from FootPro Union, will initiate corresponding legal actions. The RFEF regrets that after such an extraordinary sporting success as the one that occurred in the Soccer World Championship, it cannot be celebrated as the situation and success deserves for completely non-sports reasons." So at this time, the Spanish Federation released 2 statements. There was one that still lives on to this day, the one that I just read, and then there was another one that has since been deleted, and I think you can probably work out why. The next day, the Spanish Federation released a statement straight up claiming that Jenny Hermoso was lying in every single statement she had made about the president. At this point, I simply must stress to you that this incident was broadcast worldwide. Like, there were so many cameras on this. We saw it from every angle in 4K HD. This same day, 11 members of the coaching staff resigned, basically everyone that wasn't Jorge Vilda. If you're wondering where we're at now, we are at the hunger strike portion of this story. The hunger strike portion, of course. On August 28, 8 days post-kiss, Spanish prosecutors officially opened a sexual assault investigation into Luis Rubiales. At the same time, all of the regional heads of the Spanish Football Federation called for him to resign. You know what else happened on this day? His mum locked herself in a church and went on a hunger strike. The hunger strike lasted all of 2 days before she was hospitalized. I believe she is all good now. She was eventually discharged and from what I understand is perfectly fine now, but talk about dramatic. On August 30, we also got an opinion piece written in The Guardian from the OG critic herself, Veronica Boquete. And she devoured. She did not leave a single crumb. She wrote, "What happened with Rubiales and Jenny Hermoso had so much attention because it's around football, around a World Cup final, and with indisputable action. It has gone global because of how it happened, the moment it happened, and the importance it has had. But what if this hadn't happened? If Rubiales hadn't kissed Hermoso? We would be talking about how Rubiales is the best football federation president in the world, that Jorge Vilda is the best manager in Europe and the world, and everything would continue as normal. We have hit a threshold and we are at war to get change." Honestly, I implore everybody to go and read her article because it is coming straight from the horse's mouth. She went through the wars with this federation and she makes some really interesting points. On September 4, which feels like a lifetime after this all unfolded, the men's captains finally came out and spoke out, condemning Rubiales and talking about the whole situation. But interestingly, they did not call for his resignation. The following day, September 5th, Jorge Vilda was finally sacked. He was replaced by his assistant coach Montse Tomé, who is the first female manager of the Spanish national women's team ever. Which, I mean, points for trying. We're not going to commend fish for swimming here, but this does feel like a step in the right direction. In celebration of Jorge Vilda being sacked, Boquete opened a vintage bottle of champagne and celebrated on Instagram, which is honestly iconic. And now we get to September 6th, where Jenny Hermoso officially files a legal complaint against Rubiales. At this point, I again have to stress, this woman has not been able to enjoy her World Cup win at all. She won a World Cup. Her teammates won a World Cup. And instead of celebrating on a yacht somewhere, she is filing a lawsuit against the president. So according to the lawsuit, she's filing one for sexual assault for the kiss itself, but then also for coercion over claims that he allegedly pressured her and her family into defending him. For legal reasons, I must stress that he has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing. This man maintains his innocence completely. It's also worth noting that if convicted of the sexual assault charge alone, he could be facing a maximum of 4 years in Spanish prison. 2 days after the lawsuit was filed, Rubiales finally resigned. You'll never guess where. This man went on Piers Morgan Uncensored to resign. It's all you need to know, really. On September 15, we had the first High Court hearing for the sexual assault claim, in which Jennifer Hermoso was awarded a restraining order against Rubiales, who is now not allowed within 200 meters of her. And honestly, for the best. Hermoso's lawyer gave the following statement to the press. "We maintain what we've said from the beginning. It was a non-consensual kiss. Thanks to the images of the kiss, the entire world, the entire country has been able to observe there was no type of consent, and we are going to prove that in the courtroom." 4 days later, while all the players are still boycotting, the new coach of Spain announced her first squad for the Nations League. This squad named 15 players who were all part of the boycott, but notably did not include Jennifer Hermoso, who the coach claimed she was trying to protect. Hermoso, on the other hand, was having absolutely none of this. She released the following statement. "Protect me from what? A claim was made stating that the environment within the Federation would be safe for my colleagues to rejoin, yet at the same press conference it was announced they were not calling me as a means to protect me. The people who now ask us to trust them are the same ones who disclosed the list of players who have asked not to be called up. The players are certain that this is yet another strategy of division and manipulation to intimidate and threaten us with legal repercussions and economic sanctions." Eventually, after 7 hours of negotiations between players, agents, the federation, you name it, a decision was finally made to end the boycott. We don't know the full extent of the agreement that was made that ended the boycott, but we do know it included 6 to 9 senior officials either being given the choice to leave by their own free will or be sacked. It also changed the wording to say that now both the men's and women's Spanish national teams will just be the Spanish national teams. They've removed gendered language in a move that they say is not only symbolic but is also going to be part of wider reforms. A number of other changes have been made to reportedly make it a safe environment, but we don't know exactly specific details of this. 2 key players, Marpi Leon and Patri, who never came back from the World Cup boycott to begin with, walked out of training camp and remain boycotting to this day. On September 27, Spain played their first game after the World Cup, which was a 5-0 victory against Switzerland. And then, if you're wondering what Mr. Jorge Vilda was doing in this time, 2 weeks later, he was announced as the new coach of the Morocco women's national team. This decision has been heavily criticised. And then on October 30, FIFA capped it all off by banning Rubiales from all football-related activities for the next 3 years. FIFA have remained very tight-lipped on the specifics of this verdict, but basically he was banned for bringing the name of FIFA into disrepute. After the decision was made, Rubiales, who is no stranger to having a tantrum, took to Twitter to vent his thought. "I will go to the last resort so that justice is done and the truth shines. Due to many efforts of some politicians, media, and institutions, the disproportion and injustice committed is becoming increasingly clear. In all capitals, people, very majority, are clear about it. Rubiales can request the verdict and then appeal within the next 10 days. Like I said, we don't know any of the specifics, but this will likely come to light in the next couple of days." Jenny Hermoso is yet to comment on FIFA's ban, and honestly, I hope she is not giving this man even a crumb of her energy anymore.